Hi, folks. It's Dr. Spears. I want to talk to you guys about the MCAT and especially if you're retaking the MCAT or what you need to know if you're going into the MCAT for the first time, what to expect in regards to your performance and scoring and how you can do well on the exam. This is what you need to know because I've recently spoken with a student that they unfortunately had to take the MCAT a second time and they got the exact same score. However, they said that they had switched up their study methodology. They were taking a lot of full length practice, AAMC sanctioned practice exams, and they just felt that they knew the material a lot better than what was indicated on their score because it was the exact same score after a year in between the original test take and retaking the second time. And they just felt that they would do a lot better in regards to that. And so, what students don't realize is that the MCAT is similar to the ACT and the SATs that you guys took in high school to get ready for college, where it's kind of reference based. What I mean by reference based, it's your score isn't based on your raw knowledge per se. It's also based on your performance in comparison to everybody else who's taking the exam at that time. And so that's why you see when you take the MCAT, you'll get your numerical score, and then you'll also have a percentile. That's to show what percentile you ranked out of everybody else who was taking the MCAT at that time. So that's what happens with students. They're not aware of that. And so they're taking the test, they're doing a lot of work, they're studying hard, doing everything that they need to do, and they just feel like their master material is at an entirely different level. And then they get the exam back, and they're disappointed that the score hasn't improved as much as they wanted to. And that's just because maybe the day that you're taking the test, you have, let's say, all the gunners are taking the test that day and they just know the material and they're going to just raise the bar of what's needed to get a higher or equivalent score just because of that. So that unfortunately puts you in a bad light, but no one's going to know that until after the test is taken and all the data's been computerized and worked with to have your final outcome with that percentile score. So that's just an unfortunate occurrence that happens with the MCAT and some of those standardized tests where students can feel that they've done very well, but haven't seen improvement in their score. And then for when you guys actually, once you're in medical school, a lot of things have changed. You're gonna have to take something called your board, your USMLE, your step one, and by the time you guys sit for that exam, it's going to be pass fail. So you just need to get a threshold score to have a pass, or if you don't get a threshold score, it's going to be a fail. Whereas when I took the USMLE, the COMLEX, or any of those medical licensing board exams, they were all numerically graded, where you actually got an actual score to see what how you actually performed on the exam. But they're moving away from that. But the difference with the boards and licensing exams, they need to show, are you competent to be a physician? Are you competent to treat patients in the hospital or any type of setting is what they want to know. Do you have like the basic ability to be a doctor? And so with that said, you're not being scored based upon your peers. It's called a criterion exam, which means that your score is, okay, do you meet this basic threshold of what we would expect from somebody who could be a physician? So it doesn't matter how well other test takers do. It doesn't mean that your score is going to drop you down to a lower percentile. That doesn't happen. It's no matter who's taking the exam, your score is what it is because it's criterion. It's not going to be also based on how everybody else is performing on the exam. So just keep that in mind. But for you guys, by the time you take it, it's going to just be like, okay, did I pass or did I fail? Did I meet the bare minimum standard I need for this exam? And then you move on from there and you go on. However, when you take your step two, your clinical knowledge exam, that's going to be usually around your third, fourth year of medical school. You take that, and that's actually going to be a scored exam that you're going to have. So it's not going to pass or fail, but again, it's a criterion score. So just because everybody else does astronomically well doesn't mean that it's going to bump down your score, your percentile, because there isn't a percentile. You just get a 3-digit score attached to your performance on the exam. So I just want to throw that information out there for some of you guys. I know you're working on the MCAT and just trying to do better with this exam. So I want to just let you know those are some of the things that you need to consider. And you really need to make sure that you identify any weaknesses in your performance going into the MCAT. I tell students, as one of my mentors told me way, way long ago, is that the MCAT's a test you want to take once and only once. So just keep that in back of your mind. So don't feel that you're obligated to take the MCAT just because somebody says you need to do it by XYZ date. It's better to delay and have a better score, even postpone your application to the next cycle so that you can walk in and have very top scores that are going to help you get into medical school, because you don't want to go through this whole process of applying with a hope and a dream, and then ad comes like, you know what, the score just isn't what it needs to be, and so we're not going to move forward with your application. Because I tell students all the time, if you know there's a weakness in your application, that means the AdComs know there's a weakness in your application. So you need to make sure you fix that and make sure you're applying with the strongest application that you have possible when it comes to the MCAT. So just wanted to leave you guys with that information, and just know that you're almost in competition with everybody else who's taking the exam. Unfortunately, that's just what it is. And I was a political science major in undergrad, so it's basically like the nuclear arms race nowadays when it comes to these standardized tests that are reference based, because it's how everybody else is doing, and they're just moving the threshold of percentile where you guys need to be higher and higher because everybody's just performing at an exceptional level at this point. And kind of even something that my roommate from undergrad said, we both went to Northwestern, obviously, for undergrad or whatever. Then he had a younger sister who's probably like, what, 15 years younger than us. And she was going through the process of applying to schools or whatever. And he's like, yeah, I don't even think she's going to apply to Northwestern because it's just so difficult to get in there. And he's like, I don't even think I could get in now the way that the stats are and the requirements for getting into school or whatever. And you see that all the time. You see this with the MCAT and other tests that you take, like the average score that people are getting on them just keeps going higher and higher because people are not necessarily getting smarter, but they're retaining more information and knowing how to study, and are mastering what they need to know for these exams. So that's why you just see these scores just moving up and up, and each year the score gets higher and higher. I tell students, yeah, when you're applying to medical school and you need to retake the MCAT, like that MCAT score that you have, you think like, okay, that was the average that I had last year, so it should work for the following year. But again, because it's a reference based against everybody else and scores traditionally trend upward, you actually might be a little bit lower with that recycled MCAT score than everybody else, because again, just because of people performing better on these exams every time that they take it in each application cycle, the criteria for admission gets even more harder and harder to get in. So just keep that in mind. And really, I just want you guys to know, like, that's just kind of what's the happening in regards to how the MCAT scored and why you could actually get in there, feel like you learned a lot more material than a previous attempt at the MCAT, and then get a score that's equivalent to what you took previously. I've seen people have drops in their score, and also I've seen people who have dramatic improvement in your score. And so, what you need to do is give yourself the best chance of success and make sure you have a strong foundation in the knowledge that you need for the MCAT. So, study, do lots of practice problems, full length exams, and only sit for the MCAT when you're consistently scoring on your practice exams where you feel comfortable with that score, because you don't know what's going to happen on test day. But if you have a trending background of data that people can see, be like, okay, you're constantly getting this score, so most likely when you sit for the real MCAT, this should be the score you should get on it. You don't want to be in a situation where you're fighting to get a certain score for the MCAT, you're taking all these full-length exams, and you're falling short of that goal, and then maybe you just get your targeted score once. You slip by, then you're like, okay, I'm going to sit for the MCAT. More often than not, when you take the real thing, you're not going to get your targeted score because you just don't have that data and history of performing at that level on the MCAT. So you want to make sure that you're doing things to make sure that you're going to have success on that, again, because you're competing against your peers, because it's a reference based exam. You're going to get a percentile rank on that, how you performed, and you want to really make sure everything's on the up and up for you in regards to the MCATs. I just wanted to share that information for students who are preparing for the MCAT and maybe they get test scores back and they're just appalled, shocked, or dismayed about their performance because they thought they were doing a lot better. But again, you may know something, but if your peers know a lot more than you, your score is not going to be at the same level as your peers. So just make sure you do well, continue to study, and just really make sure you have ownership of the material that you need to know for the MCAT and do what you need to do to excel and do well on this exam. Because again, the MCAT's a test you want to take once and only once. So make sure you guys prepared and study well, study smart, and do everything that you can to make the MCAT your success story while you're applying to medical school.